was a CNN correspondent. He was one of Obama's speechwriters, okay? So you know you're in for a treat, because if there's one thing Obama can do, it is give a speech. And more than that, he is one of the most provocative and forward-thinking thought leaders on the future of work and on building this new economy. So super excited for this conversation. And I have a task for all of you. Yeah. So I want all of you to listen and think of your burning question. Anything that you've wanted to know but were too afraid to ask about the future of work and about generative AI, okay? And we're gonna have some mics around in the room. Okay, so with that, okay, Aneesh. So we all know that there are always, many different types of technology transformation, and AI itself is not new, right? And this generative part of AI has really been new. I remember there were times when I was talking about, let's help train people with computer science and AI. People would kind of laugh, like, ha. And now we can say we actually can skill people on AI because users can use it in their everyday lives. But it's not like a new technology, let's say. But many people are very, very worried about what that means for the workforce and for the labor force. So I'm just curious a little bit about that historical context of how have some other technology transformations influenced and impacted labor, and kind of what are you seeing trends-wise now?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm thankful that all of you are making this time because I think this is the most important conversation that we should be having as it relates to sort of AI. I'm Chief Economic Opportunity Officer at LinkedIn. My task is to make our vision, which is to create economic opportunity for every member, all 3 billion of us in the global workforce, a reality in our time. That is a crazy ambition. When the CEO of LinkedIn and I were talking about this role, we recognize that as crazy an ambition as that is, it is a realistic one because we are alive at a time where we, the humans in this room among us, will have to rebuild entire systems, especially the systems that exist around economic opportunity, employment, education, entrepreneurship. And so I always start with the recognition that all of those systems are fundamentally broken and have been since creation. If the labor market's job is to match talent and opportunity, it doesn't do a good job of that. It is one of the most opaque, inefficient, and unequal systems and markets that humans have ever created. So as I came into this role understanding that, I come in liberated from some desire to protect the status quo and more inquisitive to my journalism background of sort of like, what can we do big here that can change the brokenness? And so the first thing I do with something like AI is be an economic anthropologist, and let's go back in time, as Brad did this morning. Now, what's interesting when you do that is that you realize that, again, to the brokenness of the systems, the story of work is not a story of humans at work. The story of work that we all understand and tell is a story of technology at work, tools that increasingly change how work is done and how growth occurs. And that goes not just back to the printing press, but even back to the plow. And the water wheel and all these innovations. The wheel, you go back millions of years to fire. And so you have to start with that in mind. But as I've looked back at all these moments of disruption that come from technology, there are 4 phases that I've seen across all of them. The first is that disruption does come first. And we're seeing that already with AI. 75% of global knowledge workers are using AI at work. The second is that jobs start to change. The jobs everyone is in currently start to change. We're seeing that. Data at LinkedIn shows that nearly 70% of the skills for the average job will have changed by 2030. Just think about it, 70% by 2030. That means even if you are not changing jobs, your job is changing on you into an entirely new job. The third phase is that new categories of jobs emerge. And we haven't seen that yet. We've seen a little bit around AI jobs. Every year at LinkedIn, we put out a list that we call the jobs on the rise, so like IT jobs that are growing. 70% of this year's jobs in the US did not exist 20 years ago, did not exist. MIT has a stat, 60% of employment in 2018 did not exist in 1940. So you can see the time shrinking between when something hits and when entirely new categories of jobs emerge. And then fourth and finally, we find ourselves in a new economy. And so now there's the beginnings of sort of, well, what is coming? And I think a lot of us have rushed to define that new economy on the terms of technology as an AI economy. And I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in February that I'd encourage everyone to read with more thinking on all this, that was in reaction to that thought. I was noticing last year every conversation was about AI, 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 and underneath it was this growing fear of what's left for humans then at work in the age of AI. And it led to this sort of doom loop with like really loud dystopian predictions that humans were no longer relevant at work. And I'm like wired to be an optimist. That requires me to be more credible with my story because the human brain is harder to tell an optimistic story to than a pessimistic story. And so I really tried to research this and understand it. And I had this sort of like moment of realization that if you look at how jobs are going to change, the new categories of jobs that are going to emerge in terms of what robots are able to do and what generative AI is able to do, you start to piece together what I'm calling the relationship economy that's coming. So we had a goods economy for millennia, largely driven by agriculture, then manufacturing, anchored on physical abilities of humans. Then we had, for just a few decades now, a knowledge economy, anchored, built by big data, computer, anchored around intellectual abilities. Well, think about robots in that first bucket, you think about generative AI in that second bucket. We've never had an economy anchored on our social abilities, anchored on the skills that we uniquely have as humans that sit at the intersection of our EQ and IQ that AI can mimic. But if you think AI can beat us at it even later, go talk to neuroscientists as I do, because they'll say that's a great trick. We don't even know how we do those things. So I am calling what's coming the relationship economy. And I think that that means we need to start telling a story of work that is more about humans at work than a story of technology at work, and there's a lot that we should talk about in terms of what that will open up for us. I mean, Brad had that slide, we are one planet. We don't remind ourselves enough, we're one species. I think of the power of the UN and moments like this. It's a check-in for us as a species. How are we doing as humans? How are we doing as humanity? We need to bring that sort of pro-human energy to the conversations about work.
I love that. I love that. And I know there's already been some research that LinkedIn has also done around kind of the growth of these AI skills, but also the growth of the human skills at the same time, which I'm like, I think is just so important to highlight. Just maybe you could say a little bit more about what are some of those skills. I know people here, UNICEF, there's lots of different, especially folks that are focused on young people. Like what are the skills that we should kind of give them during this period?
So this is the task of our time as people that get why skills matter. So let's start foundationally. Again, one of the issues of the labor market is it's built on guesswork, right? It's the opaqueness of it. So you had explicit inequity built into the labor market as it starts. And everything really in our world is about 250 years old. It's the start of the industrial and cultural revolutions. So it all happened quick, fast, and started in moments of explicit inequity in the world. We did not, in a mainstream way, think all humans had equal capability. Nor should all humans even be allowed to work, as you go further back.
Yes.
So that's the world we're in. And so I think we've got to understand the power of skills is the ability to build a meritocracy in our time. Humans have never been able to do that. Because at the foundational level of the labor market, we went from explicit inequity to implicit inequity in terms of what I'd call the pedigree economy. Did you have the right degree from the right school? Do you have the right job title from the right employer? Do you know the people I know? All risk mitigation factors for hiring managers that then lock in inequity at work. So skills is radical because it is radically transparent for everyone to know what does someone have and what do they need to get the jobs that they want. And I think that's become more mainstream, even as it's slowed down, because then people say, well, where's the system so I can filter for skills in the same way I can for degrees? AI is going to help with that, but for a while it stalled out. But we all have to reaffirm our belief in skills from this pro-human view that it is the basis for meritocracy. Now, our task is to recognize that we should stop saying AI skills. And I know that that's a little bit provocative, but one of my big challenges to everyone is stop saying AI, start using AI. And the reason I do that is because, the early days of the internet, to date myself a bit, I was an intern at NBC News during the 2000 presidential election. And so LA hosted the convention, was out there, stayed at, I think, a Holiday Inn or Days Inn, showed up with some college friends, said to the manager, we have a room booked. He said, I don't see it. We said, we booked it. Here's the printout. He said, who'd you book it with? We said, the internet. He said, the internet doesn't work here. I don't know that person. Because that's what the internet was. It was this totally new thing. Now we don't say internet. We say e-commerce. We say remote work. We say creator economy. We say all these things. That's AI. AI is something that's going to exist around us. And what it's going to mean for us is what tools we use that are built on AI. So start using the tools, but we're not even in the first era of the tools. We're at the foundational level. So the tools are going to come. Unless you are, by our calculations, like 1% of workers who are going to need hard technical skills around AI, so let's put them aside and talk about 99% of workers, you don't need technical skills for AI. That's part of the power of this technology. It's a language model. So you're going to prompt AI, which means what? You're going to communicate with AI. With the exact same skill set that you use with other humans at work. You're going to try and give it as good a direction as you can, as much context as you can, as clear feedback as you can. And so now we're starting to talk about human skills. And what's both exciting about that and I don't know the right word to say, I'd say like crazy about that, is that we are starting from a place of like diminished view of self as a species. Like work has asked generally so little of us that most of us, if not all of us, are in jobs far smaller than the bigness of our potential when you factor in human skills. How many people use creativity? I mean, I have these 5 C's I define as sort of the basic pillars. Creativity, curiosity, courage, communication, and compassion. Like how many of us get to use all of what we can do on those 5 things at work? Start from a more foundational place. How many of us were ever taught how to be human across those 5 things in terms of early childhood education? You're seeing it slowly in terms of social-emotional learning, but how many of us are ever taught how to think about self, how to think about those? So very few humans, because we all are in these systems that are sort of like dehumanized from the start, learn how to be human, learn how to own their story of self and these 5 pillars of being human. And yet now we're going to be in a world of work where like we all can and should get better at these things. So for skills folks, I think it's really a moment where we have to up our advocacy for skills. And what's good for us is that there's no other way but skills now. So every conversation you've had with anyone who's like, I get it, it's great, but the systems aren't there, I'm good with the way things are. They're not good with the way things are, because the only way to understand how AI is impacting jobs is to see jobs not as titles, but as a set of tasks, to bucket the tasks into what AI is going to do, what you're going to do with AI, and then what's left for you to do, and then to help everyone bring a skills story of self to how they're going to approach that. So skills is now necessary. So that's thing 1 that's great for us. But thing 2 that we've got to start working on is how to think about building systems of credentialing, teaching, training, assessing on people skills. I talk to neuroscientists now because I do think work is going to be about talent, not tech, the human brain at the center of it. Human ideas are the new code. Human energy is the new data center. It's a whole new way. We've never been human-centric with work. And I asked them, I'm like, you guys are over here like geeking out as neuroscientists. I've been for 20 years geeking out about economic opportunity, workforce development. I feel like our worlds are going to converge. There's going to be like chief neuroscientists at companies and organizations. Do you think that? And are there any like early bridges being built? And 100% of them say, yes, I think that. And the only places, though, they say bridges have been built, athletics, because athletes are constantly pushing themselves to reach the limits of what they can do, to break through the limits. And then the military, because militaries in countries can't hire from other militaries. So whatever the talent is that they start with is the talent they've got to grow. We're going to have to all start figuring this out together. Now, that starts with nomenclature. Like, what do we actually call these? In the US, it's been called soft skills. And people are rightly calling that out as like, I mean, think about the story of humans at work. For the past century, we have built systems around IQ. Beyond that, we were derisive of EQ. Remember, we said, don't let emotion get in the way of reason. And then we have done nothing to build systems around EQ except for maybe early childhood development and social emotional learning. So we've got to now define these. And you see people skills, you see human skills, you see durable skills, you see power skills. I kind of don't care what we call it, as long as we don't call it soft. But even if you want to call it soft because it gets you in a mindset of what we're talking about, that's fine. But we're going to have to all decide what it's called. We're going to have to decide, are my 5 C's the like right starting point? Which one matters more? I've been talking to neuroscientists who just study creativity, and they'll tell you why they think that's the one to focus on. I think curiosity is going to matter a ton, that everyone's differentiated value at work is going to be that they found and are feeding their curiosity, so they're learning every day, they're adapting every day, these core things we're going to have to do, but we're going to have to figure that out. Then we're going to have to figure out, well, how does like attention and focus factor into that? How does lived experience factor into that? What's exciting about that is if you take those 5 C's, you know who has, I went to Harvard, and I can tell you that degree should tell us less and less over time. I don't think it told us as much as we thought it did even when I got it in terms of aptitude for work and dealing with challenges. But you know who's got that level of degree? Refugees.
Yep.
Like who can better claim the skill of resilience than a refugee? Who can better claim the skills of empathy, critical listening, collaboration than historically marginalized groups? Women and people of color, in the US especially, have had to use those skills to hack systems that weren't just broken, but were explicitly and then implicitly unequal. So as you move these skills to the center, you now can reset the systems around human belief and potential, where all the people who we think about most, but the systems think about least, are positioned to succeed in a way that's never been true before. But that's going to be a lot of it on us and the story we tell. I mean, a lot of this is going to come down to storytelling. And what I'm saying to you, whatever resonates, you telling to other people, and us starting to grow what I think is a movement, a pro-human movement around economic freedom, not just opportunity, but the freedom that economic opportunity provides.
Yeah, that's great. Personally, I like power skills, so it's powerful. And just a point that you made is one that I've been thinking a lot about, because when I think about collaboration, I'm like, I was talking to a group of young women. I'm like, guess who has those skills? It's women as well. It's other marginalized groups like you're talking about.
So I think that if we do one thing right, which we should always challenge ourselves to do, so we do something big, I think it is gender equity.
Yes.
And I think that for a bunch of reasons, it is a global story that we can all approach together as one. I think that we're in a very interesting moment to mansplain gender equity to all the women here. We're in an interesting moment for gender equity in AI because women are overrepresented in the jobs that are more vulnerable to AI.
That's right.
They're underrepresented in terms of self-identifying with AI skills. But I think that goes to the story. We were just talking earlier, our team, AI literacy isn't a thing. Like, AI skills aren't a thing. I think men are just more bombastic about putting on that they have these skills, but they're not technical skills. We have a skill signal on LinkedIn, by the way, that women will apply to a job at a higher rate if it's described as a skill signal, which our AI is helping to do, rather than the job qualifications. Because again, to mansplain it, like, women think they need all those qualifications to apply for the job. Men, it's like, oh, I've got one of them, I'll apply for it. And I think that that's probably happening with like the skills that are going on. So we've got to both like help from the gender equity place, have a conversation that is approachable for everyone to understand this, and then have a conversation that is badge-inducing for women to own the skills that they over-index on and have been underpaid for, which are the IT skills. And I think one area we could focus everyone on and measure success around that is about inclusive growth, that is about economic growth, that is about progress, prosperity, all of it all at once, is women in leadership positions. Like, the one thing that any board can do to feel better about what they're going to have as a business in the age of AI is just have a woman CEO. Like, things like that we can start pushing from an affirmative advocacy place with the fundamentals that aren't simply about what's morally right, but what's in the interest of organizations.
Yep. Or a woman head of an agency, or a woman president, or so many other things, right? Okay, I'm gonna see if there's any questions in the room. I have another one if there aren't. Any questions? August, wonderful. Would you mind introducing yourself as well? And I think we're gonna get you a microphone. Or you could also just say the question, I'll repeat it for you.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding is that with the advancement of generative AI, humans will require higher level cognitive skills. But current pedagogies still focus on content and instructions and to teach. Thank you, Rick.
So Augustine from Eidos Global, long time partner of Microsoft in reskilling America's region. So given that we need higher and more complex skills, but pedagogies focus on instructional and content, how do we speed up educational process to catch up with the technological change? That would be my current challenge.
The educational process. Yeah, so this is a big one, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think, and I think this is a great thing, any system that we have today is going to survive the amount of change that's coming. And if you start from a place that the systems are broken to start with, like, that should be a good thing, but then it's going to come with messiness. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is get us to better more quickly and more cleanly, than otherwise. The systems of education are among the most difficult to change. They're entrenched in a lot of countries. They're incentivized against innovation. And a lot of this also can be for good reason and wanting to make sure that there's equal access to some level of education, that's formalized and uniformly, the curriculum's like uniformly credentialed. But this is where, like, the way to think about AI is it is two things at once. It is a tool and it is a force for change. We talked a lot about what it's going to do as a force for change because what it's going to mean for work. Let's talk about what it is as a tool. So I'm someone that has long believed technology is a tool unlike any humans have had. And if that's true, and we are pro-human in our belief of self, we should be able to do things bigger than we've ever done, especially go after entrenched issues like poverty that we've never been able to go after. I don't think technology is anywhere close to lived up to that because I don't think the building of technology in the early innings had the ambition to do that. It ended up very quickly becoming about consumer convenience, and that became everything. AI is different. So the way I think about AI is AI sits at the intersection of progress and personalization. So pick anything that you want to have progress around, and let's say education is it. You now can build personalized teaching, training, coaching tools for everyone that meets them where they're at. Now, in order to do that, you have to have data on how that person thinks, how they operate. Guess what? You all are sitting on that data. So when we talk about bias, English bias is a good example of AI. It's because it is built on the data set that currently exists, which is a data set that we know does not represent the people we think about most because they are marginalized and by definition on the margins. So they are not in those data sets. Those data sets, we have to mitigate bias. We have to make sure human bias doesn't get baked in, but they are not in those data sets. You all have their data sets. And so one of the things I think as we think about AI tools in education is that we don't have to think about the system of education. We can think about education as something that happens around the systems while we try and adapt it within. And so every nonprofit, every organization like the UN, starting to think data first, tech first, starting to build your own AI tools for the people that you have the data and that you are thinking about most when the world thinks about them least, is critical right now. And I think that is, if we can figure that out and get cross-sector partnerships to support that, as we get to a more pro-human story on all this, you're going to have so many people wanting to be part of these efforts. We can then open up access to education and access to knowledge. And I just did a LinkedIn post this morning on it. Take the question of productivity. Like, one of the things that's difficult for the human brain right now is the old and the new coexist. So it sort of makes sense that nothing makes sense. It used to be that, like, big technology came and then years would pass before the new economy emerges. So you'd have an orderly transition that was definitionally unequal because guess what? By the time the transition came to the worker, it was all figured out for them. They got to the change last after it came from the top down. Here's what it means for you. It's now happening like bottoms up, middle out. It's happening all at once, all over the place. So old and new are coexisting. So productivity, the old version was we defined it output over input. Humans were part of the input, minimize cost of humans, increase profitability of output. I've been thinking more and more about, in this relationship economy, when humans and the human brain is at the center of work, how should we be measuring productivity? If human energy is the new data center, then burnout is something you're managing for the business, not just to do good or for attention. If human ideas are the new code, you want a diversity of humans in there pushing each other to get to the best idea. And it hit me the other day that probably the way we should think about it is the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance. These were moments that were propelled forward by human thought, not by humans coming up with new tools and technology that propelled us forward. The thoughts themselves propelled us forward. If we can figure this bit out and we can help every human bring the best of their thinking to bear, help every human in every part of the world try to think about entrepreneurship or tools that they want to attach to the problems that they have lived experience around, all the way up to climate, but down to their own community areas, like whatever we saw with the Renaissance, whatever we saw with the scientific revolution, whatever we saw with the Enlightenment, that wasn't all humans getting a chance to be part of that. It's a privileged, colonial set of humans. What if all of us get to be part of that moment? That's, I think, what we're tiptoeing into.
That's wonderful. Yeah. That's great. No, and you know, you've teed it up perfectly, because in the later kind of conversations, we'll get to see how these tools can work in the classroom, actually putting the teachers at the center, the students at the center. So having that personalized tutor. So it's really fantastic.
I think we got another question.
Oh, question. Yes, absolutely.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Osi. I'm the CEO of Code with Klossy, which is an organization that focuses on gender equity
Nice.
For young women and gender expansive youth. So, thank you. So I'm an optimist, but I'm going to ask you a pessimistic question.
Please.
So I think one of the things I love hearing about this articulation is this idea of the stories that we tell ourselves as being powerful. And I think the question is, how many people do you believe by that story that the current economy is broken in its current stance? And then the follow-up is, if we do tell ourselves a different story, how do we prevent a story usurping that takes us backward?
Yeah.
The data point I love to use is that in 1985, we had peaked about the number of women who were getting CS degrees at like 40%. Video games and the personal computer and the narrative around boys and video games changed that drastically. And there has been correlation after correlation that shows that 1985 was this tipping point because the story that women were hearing about the use of the personal computer necessarily excluded them. So I love story. But again, a pessimistic take is that we can always change that story and that story then takes us backwards. So I'm curious how you think about that.
So I've had this sort of what I call squiggly line career as a war correspondent, then a speechwriter, President Obama, and at Treasury. Then I did startups, and then I was like economic policy advisor for Governor Newsom before this job. And for a while, it was like really hard to tell the story of self because it was cool job titles that made no sense as a through line. Until I had this moment where actually the whole time I've been doing explanatory storytelling. And that only came like a year or two ago. So I become a student of storytelling. And I become this like metacognition sort of the story of storytelling. And it is the oxygen for our species. There's a great book, Sapiens, Brief History of Humankind, where Yuval calls out that actually it isn't that we built tools that got us to this level. It's that we told stories. We create intersubjectivity to allow us to organize in bigger, more complex ways. The UN is a story. The monetary order is a story. We individually are stories, and we just get enough people to buy into it, and it becomes a real thing that we consider equal to the natural world. So as Joan Didion, the great American author, said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. The story matters a lot right now. Microsoft CTO made this point last year. What story we tell is going to lead to what reality we create. So if we tell a bad story about what's going to happen, it's more likely that'll be what happens. If we tell a good story, that'll be more likely. And Yuval in Sapiens quantifies this. He defines level 0, 2 levels of chaos, as the weather. So whatever you predict, it does what it's going to do. Level 1 is human history, where the prediction affects the outcome. So the story is really important. Now, because of that, I've done a lot of homework on my story. And I would offer up that I feel like my story by the day is less optimistic and more realistic. Now, that biases me towards a bullishness that no matter whether someone believes my story or not, the fundamentals of this shift are going to make it real. The businesses that deny this and don't increase women in leadership are just going to start to be worse off and shut down. The businesses that realize it and the organizations that realize it and start to promote women in leadership are going to be better off. And I do believe that the more I look at it. I think the fundamentals are in our favor as we think about not just like innovation, but equity. But the story is going to be critically important for us to get to, because we exist in a world that is down on humans, and we've sort of internalized that. And what's important about organizations like the UN and gatherings like UNGA is that if you think about the human story that we tell of ourselves, like last year I couldn't use the word human, it went over people's heads. I had to say people. This year I can say humans, but species is like still I don't know if it'll go over someone's head. I think next year I'll be able to say that and we'll all get it. But the reason is that like as humans, our highest altitude of self-definition is no further than maybe the nation state, what country are we a citizen of, maybe our ethnicity or our gender, maybe the community we feel most connected to or the company that we feel is definitional, but it's always ever been at that altitude. We've never thought about ourselves or talked about ourselves as the true altitude, which is that we are all one species, and that we know with data, like 99% of who we are is the same. And I think that's going to push it. AI is going to push us to start doing that more. And then I think the gender piece is going to be critically important in terms of the story. And so if you think about, and anyone who had DEI officials in your organization, they know this because they are the change agents of the past era that we're all going to have to be. Or anyone that's done movement building of any form, political campaigns or issue advocacy. So the whole goal is to persuade more people to see the story you're telling, to live the story you're telling, and share the story you're telling. So when you do that, you sort of start with 100% of people, and then there's like 2 groups of 20% that generally mobilizing and movement building says don't worry about. There's 20% who are never going to believe it. And that's because their own story of self is too connected to the old story. And so it's existential for them to challenge it, generally. And then there's 20% who get it. And like, you don't need to work with them. They need to go get other people. So then there's like the 60% in the middle that are the persuadables. And I think when it comes to the power of women, we are in a really important moment of like locking in that 60% in terms of these conversations we're having globally. I think that means we have to lean into it. I think globally, we have leaned back from gender as a global conversation, gender equity, for a bunch of reasons. I think in important ways, race became a global conversation, sustainability became a global conversation, and we shouldn't have to compete among equities that we all want to advocate for. But I do think this is a moment where we all should really wrap our arms around gender equity, because the fundamentals align here in terms of the story locking. And what's powerful about the story once locked is then you have a new foundation for a reality to create. And I think we're in a very important moment for that.
Wonderful. Well, I will have to say thank you so much for your optimism.
Realism. Yeah.
Realistic optimism. That we are one species,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that there is so much that we can all do together, especially anchoring on our power skills.
Yes.
I want you to put that in there too.
Well, we get to decide today.
Okay,
so
there you go. Okay, done. We decided. It's power skills, okay?
Yeah.
And I think for all of you to kind of take these ideas and thoughts and create those stories as well, and share those stories and share your stories. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I always end with gratitude for folks like you in the room. You did not have to do the work you're doing. You chose to do it because of a belief in humans at some level, a belief in like equity of humans, potential of humans, capability of humans being equal, and a recognition of broken systems. So I feel like we get each other, but you couldn't have chosen to be in your role at this moment. And this is a moment where everyone who did the work that we did up until this moment, all they could ever do was incremental fixes. The bigger they understood the inequities to be, the more incrementalist we had to be because they were so big and entrenched. Like what they would give. I mean, go back hundreds, if not thousands of years to the people as smart as us, with as big a recognition of inequity as us, what they would give to be in this room right now, where we can conceive of and execute against an idea of remaking the entire thing. So we should be, feel gratitude.
Aneesh, Raman, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.